for regulators. Three-part test, legitimacy of limits based on certain elements of the public interest and also the necessity. And we know that based on legislation and also based on international standards, there are very different areas of the public interest that are considered as legitimate to introduce certain limits to the right to freedom of expression. National security, defense and international relations, public health and safety, prevention, investigation and prosecution of criminal actions, privacy, conservation of the environment, equality of parties in court proceedings, confidentiality of certain types of deliberations, administration of justice, inspection, control and supervision of public authorities, so on and so forth. There are many of them. But, of course, we know also that based on Article 19, these restrictions, these references to the public interest cannot be used just like that in order to restrict the right to access to information. According to the principle of necessity, there has to be a pressing social need that makes it necessary to impose a restriction based on certain aspects of the public interest, and the reasons given by the state to justify the restriction must be relevant and sufficient. That is, the point of view of limitations. But here we also have, based on the principle of necessity, and if we use the language of Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights, the necessity in a democratic society, the assessment of the necessity of certain measures also requires to determine whether there is an overriding public interest. An overriding public interest that would rather justify the disclosure and would not justify restricting. The public interest in disclosing information would outweigh the public interest in restricting access to information. The public interest override, we find it in international documents, we find it in decisions taken sometimes by oversight bodies, and we find it, for example, in decisions adopted by national courts when reviewing decisions taken by national authorities. And as a matter of fact, with UNESCO, I elaborated a little summary of the most relevant case law in this field. What is interesting, I would say, is that probably in many jurisdictions, public interest to restrict access to information is more clearly identified than the public interest that would justify disclosing information. In some cases, it's true, it's just a reference in the law. There's no clear definition of the meaning of national security and what national security would justify, but at least there's a reference in the law. Whereas the overriding public interest is much harder to find, at least in access to information laws. There's only a reference to the possible existence of an overriding public interest, and probably we need to find it in other legislations, or in some cases we need to look into basic constitutional principles to understand that there's an overriding public interest. Basic political democratic principles such as promoting accountability and transparency, enhancing public participation in government decisions, safeguarding democracy by enabling oversight and accountability, and protecting, for example, the public health. And this is why, in many cases, for example, the public interest in disclosing the agenda of the President of the Constitutional Court overweights the public interest in protecting, let's say, the privacy or the confidentiality of the meetings of a high institution of the state. Or, for example, just to tell you an interesting case or funny case, the letter sent by Prince Charles to different ministers when he was a prince, expressing his opinions on policies in the United Kingdom were considered to be a matter of public interest in a democracy, so that the supposed secrecy or confidentiality of this correspondence would not justify as a public interest the not disclosing the information. But as you see, I mean, the main problem here is that this is an exercise that normally takes place at the level of the case law and oversight decisions taken by oversight bodies. Means that this is a case-by-case decision, and of course we have here issues of proper mainstreaming, proper consistency, and also the fact that we are putting sometimes on the shoulders of public information officers, oversight bodies, judges, the obligation of making very complex determinations that have a very strong political component. And when it comes to public information officers, of course, I mean, it's very difficult for them to feel the confidence to say, well, in order to protect democracy, I will allow the disclosure of the letters of the minister, for example. No, that particularly because the law is not as clear when it comes to disclosure that when it comes to restrictions. So here the main issue, the main question here is how to incorporate this public interest override into general, or how to transform these into general principles, how to mainstream it in practices at different levels of public administration, so that we don't need to wait until a specific decision is taken by an oversight body or by a court. And here I can just make a few reflections or a few proposals. Better definition of the public interest in different pieces of legislation, the public interest in positive when it comes to disclosing certain types of information. For example, national security laws, apart from defining the areas where national security must be clearly protected, they should also perhaps define the areas where there's a public interest, also for the sake of accountability of national security bodies, to actively disclose information. Because here we are not talking about decisions related to granting access to a specific individual, but also, of course, this is a balance that needs to take place whenever taking decisions that have to do with active transparency, active disclosure. For that purpose, I think it would also be advisable that different public bodies undertake systematic risk and benefit analysis, general risk and benefit analysis when it comes to the information that they handle and when it comes to the possibilities of disclosing certain type of information. So that would be some sort of an internal good practice. Better training of public information officers, so that they really understand that the public interest override is something that is some sort of an analysis, some sort of a test that needs to be run every time they take a decision. But also, if we empower, if we train public information officers, we also perhaps need to better protect them, so that if they take a decision in this area in a very sensitive topic, they also have sufficient legal protection within the organization. Consultation mechanisms. I mean, I think it was mentioned yesterday that we are not talking here about transparency for the sake of transparency. We are not talking here about the public interest for the sake of the public interest. I think sometimes public bodies would really need to consult, would really need to engage with citizens and civil society to really understand what is in the public interest to be disclosed. Because in some cases, let me put it this way, in good faith, some public bodies may understand, well, this is not a matter of public interest, that is an internal issue, but if there's a civil society organization that shows that in a systematic manner showing certain documents is good for the public interest, then the practices may change. Public reports on decisions taken, so that there's public scrutiny on whether this balance has been stricken in all cases, and also to assess whether this has been properly done. Also, I think that this would require having some databases of decisions, so to promote let's say, consistency, or at least databases of the criteria that have been used within a certain context to decide whether a public interest outweighs another public interest. In my personal experience, I was involved in the project in the Maldives on these matters, and we worked with the Information Commissioner in the elaboration of informal, non-binding documents that would announce the kind of criteria that would be used by the Information Commissioner when deciding on matters related to national security, privacy, and commercial secrets. That is to say, how the different public interests would be taken into consideration, which criteria would be used to decide when something is of public interest and when there's an overriding public interest that would justify disclosing information, so that it is not just a case-by-case decision. This is something that is preceded by the formulation of certain criteria, informal criteria, if we want to call them this way, because it's hard to introduce this in a regulation, and there might be issues of legal certainty, so on and so forth, but at least to have documents, let's say, elaborated by oversight bodies. Because, of course, I understand that oversight bodies are the main protagonists here when it comes to not only to assess individual decisions in these kind of scenarios, but also in order to monitor the decisions that are taken by different types of body, to make sure that there's consistency in the way the public interest is assessed, and in order to make sure that there are no contradictions, no changes, and no inappropriate definitions of the idea of the public interest. Again, the public interest override is very important. It is very good that we have it in many laws. It's very good that we have it in international documents. It's very interesting that there are many courts that have already been used in different jurisdictions, the override, the idea of the existence of overriding public interest to grant access to information. But now it's time to use it in a more systematic way. To incorporate it into regulatory instruments, policy documents, risk assessments, and other types of, let's say, documents, so that decisions taken by public authorities, either on the basis of a request or when deciding about how to articulate their policies of active transparency, the public interest, and therefore democracy, access to information, are properly served. I understand that this is, of course, a very challenging area, but I think it is at least good to invite you to consider these matters from the legal point of view, because I think this is a very important, relevant discussion. And of course, I invite you in your respective jurisdictions to further consider, and also to read the compilation that we did for UNESCO on the case law on this matter, because some cases are, I believe, particularly illuminating in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan Barata. I think another clap will be. And with that, we launch straight into the panel sessions. And kicking off the panel sessions today, we have adoption of the Accra Statement, harnessing the power of data for positive change, a commitment to access to information. May I now invite the moderator, the Venerable Dorothy Gordon, Digital Technology for Development Tactician from Ghana. Please clap for them as they come up. And the speakers to follow: Editan Ojo, Executive Director, Media Rights Agenda from Nigeria; Guy Ogi Beja, Chair of the Board, Distinguished Fellow, Research Pens Plus Bytes in Ghana. Do I have Banu Nupan? He's the rapporteur and therefore will be doing their work. And so it's also important for me to say to you that there will be lunch. I know it doesn't say so on the program, but at 2 p.m., expect lunch. Please don't leave before then. A sumptuous buffet has been laid out. So, Madam Dorothy, have you got your phone, your mic? Over to you. Thank you very much. Please clap for them as they get ready.
Thank you very much, and welcome to this exciting panel. I think we're going to have a great discussion. And I'm very pleased that as we look at the Accra Statement, distinguished persons, Edith, Ojo, and Guy Berger, who are actually at the inception of all of this discussion on access to information. And I'm sure they'll give us a little bit of insight into that as well as we discuss. The statement is the result of extensive consultations. And yesterday we all received copies. I'm sure you've read them. And you see that we also have endorsements. It's important as we move towards evidence-based decision-making. And I want to invite Ms. Dube to give us a little bit of insight into that whole process and some of the things that you think are very important, which were hotly debated as this was crafted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought maybe you were going to attempt to say my first name.
I'm too wise for that.
Thank you very much. So I'm very pleased to present some of the highlights of the statement titled Harnessing the Power of Data, a Commitment to Strengthening Access to Information in the Digital Age. And as it has already been indicated, the statement was developed through a consultative process which involved some of you that are in the room and some experts that are not here with an interest in access to data, particularly its intersection with access to information. And what is important to say that this collaborative or consultative approach was very important in gathering some of the valuable insights that form now what is part of the statement and the perspectives, but also in ensuring that the statement reflects a collective vision and commitment to enhancing access to data. And like you see at the end of the statement, you have a lot of endorsements, which for me is indicative of how important this drive on access to data is. And some of the takeaways, from the statement, just the status of access to data is very important to the right of access to information. As we have been saying yesterday, that access to information underpins democracy, transparency, accountability. So access to data comes as an essential element of that. And another takeaway is on the impact on decision making and public participation. Harnessing the data shapes our societal dynamics and also informs evidence-based policies and approaches that have already been alluded to. But also it empowers us as the public, as the officials, the governments, to also informed decisions. So that importance of public participation is a major takeaway. And also the ethical data practices as well, speaking about the data collectors and users need to adhere to the ethical principles, which ensures that elements such as privacy protection are upheld, and also responsible handling of data, and also considering some of the the impact of things such as biases. And as we are promoting access, also restrictions will be there, but any restrictions should be legitimate, should be for legitimate purposes and must align with international standards. Also, very important takeaway is that of upholding principles of equity, transparency and inclusivity. When we're talking about the transformative nature of access to data. We can only achieve, we can only realize that the impact of the transformative nature when we adhere to those principles, especially inclusion, so that the existing, marginalization or vulnerabilities are not further exacerbated. And also important to that is the issue of oversight and accountability, and the responsible bodies for oversight and accountability should ensure that they monitor data practices, implement safeguards to address biases in data usage or automated decision making, and basically promoting fairer approaches to data utilization. Also, another very important takeaway, the quality of data. That is very important, quality of data. It can only be useful when it's of good quality. If it's of good quality, if it's not of good quality, we cannot rely on it to achieve, for example, sustainable development goals. So the quality of data, I underline that, and also literacy. We need that, data literacy, and also investing on programs that facilitate data literacy. But above all, the collaborative stakeholder engagement is also very important for unlocking the potential of data. Thank you very much.
Wow, you've given us a great oversight. Thank you so much. You did touch on a few touchy areas. One of them being ethics, and we have a great representative of, in fact, I think all of you in some way are representatives of the media, but you work in Africa's most dynamic media environment. Can I say that? Do you have any particular concerns as you look at this statement in terms of African media and how it's going to support your work? Or do you think it could possibly introduce some new barriers and elements that you need to pay attention to?
Thank you very much, Ms. Bema. Can you hear me? Thank you, Dorothy. I think part of the reason behind this initiative is the realization that data has value. It's a resource. And like many types of resources that are available around the world, we don't appear to have full control over our resources on the continent. And when you look at the media sector in particular, that is a real challenge because for one reason, there's economic value behind data, which the media is not fully leveraging because it doesn't have full control over that resource. But there is also the ability to leverage data for reporting, for journalistic activities. And again, if media professionals do not have access to data, then that limits the extent to which they are able to do their reporting and indeed perform one of their crucial functions, which is holding governments accountable. The other also being ensuring that societies are adequately informed about things going on around them. So there is a huge opportunity here for the media to benefit from this, both in terms of the economic value as well as the more reporting opportunities it provides and the knowledge societies that it can lead to across the continent. However, there is a real challenge. I think Lengiwe referenced the challenge of data literacy, which the media also suffers from, unfortunately. It's important that media professionals acquire the skills to be able to do data analysis, data visualization, and all of those skills that are necessary for them to utilize data fully. Indeed, when you look across the spectrum of stakeholders, I would say that the media is the most critical because the core business of the media sector is information. Information gathering, information processing, information dissemination. So anything that has that character of information is critically important for the media. So again, how do we ensure that the African media is able to acquire the skills that enables it to leverage data to its fullest potential. I think that that's one of the challenges we need to look to as we try and move this forward. So the statement from my perspective is evolving because it's an issue that we're trying to understand fully. A few years ago, the idea of regulated data would be something many people would say, no, it's voluntary. But over time, I think we've come to realize that we need to have some guardrails in terms of how we are able to access data, use data, and we're not even talking about the whole question of personal data, which falls within this as well.
Edit. It doesn't sound, is it working? No. Edit. Specifically, could you comment on how media across Africa works together or doesn't work together? I mean, if we look at the statement, it's a little bit silent on cross-border cooperation. But is there real cross-border cooperation? Because now with media, you see the power of one article is even beyond our continental borders.
I would say we are beginning to see a little bit of cross-border collaboration and cooperation, but it is really a far cry from what it needs to be. There is a lot of reusing and resharing of information products put out by certain media entities and organizations, but we don't really have a deliberate effort by African media across national borders to do joint investigations, do joint inquiries, and so on. And I think that we need that, especially given that many of the countries in the region try to repress the media sector. And operating on a continental basis, I think, would provide more opportunities for the media to be able to report more freely, reach larger audiences, and potentially increase their revenues.
It's interesting. So we've heard from one set of stakeholders, that's the media. I want to ask Guy Berger, as you know, former UNESCO employee, should I put it that way? But actually who has focused a lot during his career on freedom of information. Well, how do you see the difference here, particularly to do with stakeholders? Do you see a different set of stakeholders in this arena vis-a-vis freedom of information or access to data? How does it go? You've got a mic.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dorothy, and good morning, everybody, especially old friends, young friends, and hello to Ghana. I hope you like my shirt. It's blue to remind you there's a sky out there, a blue sky, an open sky.
Is that a Ghana shirt?
That's a Ghana shirt. That's why I'm advertising it.
Yes.
You can go down the road and you can buy yourself, not just this, but many beautiful Ghanaian clothes. So I'm sharing some data with you about...
Was that information or data?
Was that information? This is a very good point because actually information can become data for further knowledge operations. But mainly what we're looking at with this statement is raw data that you can quantify into statistics. And then you can use that. It becomes measurable. As Edith said, it becomes very valuable in that sense. And I think in the old days, and maybe even today, information commissioners see themselves working only on information level. But my dear colleague, Gilbert Sindugwe in the front here, he shows that if you can get data, for example, on public contracting, about who gets the contracts, you can show that women are not getting public contracts. You can only get that if you get the data, and he's getting the data in his Africa Center for access to information. So that's, I think, one example of where people can get the stakeholders. Now, I just want to say one thing here. Where it's different also is that historically most access to information has been access to information held by the state. But who has the data today? It's the private sector. So now we also have to think that is where the most valuable companies have made their money on data. We know that. artificial intelligence. We know it can't run without data. So we've got to widen this, and the information commissioners have got to start thinking, okay, what if we get a request for data, not only data from the public, but data from the private sector? Is there public interest that can unlock this? Because, of course, it's valuable, and these data holders don't want to disclose it. They also, of course, have responsibilities for data protection, so they have to be careful about what they disclose. But what's happening around the world is that in places like the European Union, people have a right to access data in these private companies. In the US, there's a bit of access, it's voluntary. Here, you have no rights to data. And I wanted to now turn to your stakeholders. I just read yesterday or the day before, in Lagos, they've now got Uber to agree to give the data on Uber rides to help with traffic management. Fantastic. That shows how useful it is. But it's voluntary. In my own country, South Africa, Google is sharing data with the Tourism Authority. Fantastic. But it's voluntary. Okay, so this is beginning to tell you something. I wanted to say in my own country also there's an AI startup, and they want to get access to data held by the public broadcasting because they want to train large language models in African languages. And the public broadcaster is not using this information, this data, the archives, but they won't release it on any basis. So you have an issue here whereby stakeholders are very interested in getting access to data, but they don't have the right to get access to data. And the AU, as you know, Dorothy Gordon, has a data strategy framework speaking about the importance of cross-border data, which is also what you were talking about. But who can unlock that data? It's you, the information commissioners, who can unlock that data with the necessary safeguards. Now, the last thing I just want to say, to hold the floor one more minute, this statement is part of work coordinated by Hlengiwe, and it's by the African Alliance for Access to Data, which is bringing together a whole lot of stakeholders, researchers, scientists, NGOs, women's groups, health groups, you name it, everybody who's interested in data, they're welcome to join. And shout out, hello, members of the Alliance who are watching this, because we told the Alliance that it's streamed live. So hi, colleagues, you can see we are promoting the Alliance. This is an important way
they're all going to become members.
I hope so. Please do follow up with us. And so we have a lot to do to raise awareness, to raise data literacy, and then to get the regulatory and the regulators to come into the party and help us unlock this.
Guy, you raised a very important issue. First of all, let me say that listening to you, the only big difference that I'm hearing in terms of stakeholders is the huge role that the private sector now plays. But I think you need to be clear on which private sector, because we are talking about big tech, we are talking about those who are powering AI, so you're talking about essentially the US, a little bit of Japan, and quite a lot of China. So it's geographically limited, it's limited in the numbers and the concentration. You talked about giving access to language. Now this is a very interesting topic as we're in the decade of indigenous languages from the UN level. And what we found is when Africans do give their language data to big tech for free, they then have to pay for the tools. Hello? For the tools that are developed using those language data sets. So it means that this is a very complicated area where we need to figure out what kind of licensing regimes that will be given. And I think Ojo Edet really reminded us that the data is being monetized. And we don't want to give it away for free to have to pay for it to be used by us once tools have been developed using it. I couldn't resist that. It's one of my favorite topics of discussion. So now, Jerry, civil society is deeply involved in this. Do you see any real barriers for your involvement that come out of this Accra statement?
Yes, thank you, Dorothy, for the question, and good morning to everyone. I like the statement, and I think that it lends itself to the recognition that data is a global and a public good, and at the same time, I think it also lends itself to once we're able to adopt and implement it towards achieving Goal 16 of the SDG, which seeks to build inclusive institutions and society and access to justice, underpinned by access to data and information. Now to the problems, I see 4 clear problems. The first one that stands out for me is the political will. I mean, we hear governments all going up for open data and what have you, passing laws, and you find that some of the laws are even restrictive. Some are redundant. Some you don't even have legislative instruments to guide its implementation. And governments, especially in Africa, are squeamish about open data, citing reasons of security, national security, which is a very vague excuse they use all the time. And then also for their own politics, the access to certain information will weaken their governments. And this problem actually will make it very difficult, it's something that we need to, I'm happy that
Do you mean data or you mean information?
Data. So giving out data, of course, and then also, when it's cleaned and become information, it becomes difficult to access it, especially in certain governments. I like the fact that Edet mentioned that it is a living document, and I think we need to look at, how do we advocate to make sure governments buy into open data and making it shareable among sectors and communities. The other problem that I see is data governance. In terms of, of course, data, as we see it, is transformative, it will lead to inclusive development and all of that. But then, are we looking at issues of ethics? Which I'm sure, Dorothy, you mentioned a lot of it, in our conversation. The ethics of it, what ethical frameworks we have to guide data collection, respecting people's privacy, security, who ends up with the data? We had a big issue, during SIM card registration in Ghana, where you go and your data is being taken by somebody's phone. We don't know where the phone is coming from, where the data is landing and all of that. And, in our quest for open data, we should also pay attention to, data transparency and accountability, and those who are holding it, what are they using that data for? And then in our age, I think we can't talk about problems without looking at mis and disinformation, where data is being weaponized, to bring about mistrust in institutions, and also bringing about data being used to bring about strife. And
are you talking in elections?
And in elections, yes. I didn't want to touch on it because Ghana, we are in a thorny situation at the moment with our elections, and it's not smooth sailing. But I mean, we'll come out of it very peacefully.
As always, as always.
So mis and disinformation is key, and I'm happy UNESCO is in a room and advocating for media and information literacy. We need to build the capacities, the attitude of people to be able to tell what is false and
Jerry, I think that one of the things that I've observed is African civil society organizations working in this space are not that many.
Yeah.
Is there anything we could do to encourage more involvement, more awareness? I mean, logically, the best way would be to get civil society organizations working in other areas, for example, on gender or disability, to become more aware of this problem. But do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm happy you bring that up. I mean, Pen Plus Byte, we lead, in this initiative, in the sub-region. We partner with UNESCO during the MIL week, which is coming up very soon. But what we need to do is, put a message across that mis and disinformation cuts across all facets of our life. So if you're working on human rights, there are issues of mis and disinformation that affect your work. If you're working in health, education, even in corruption, good governance, you need to have, disinformation, issues coming up, and you need to adopt media and information literacy, digital literacy as well, to counter some of this, to make your advocacy work, worthwhile and, make the right impact as well. So yes, it's a critical issue that it should be driven by just a few institutions, but then it should be linked to all the other sectors of work that civil society are working on. Yeah.
I see that others on the panel want to comment, and I'll give Ms. Dube the opportunity first, and then Guy.
I'll just put across one issue which you can take up, which is the digital divide. I mean, for us to achieve this, then we need to make sure that people have access to internet, people have access to the platforms to access information, to be able to impart their rights, to be able to, demand, accountability from government.
Let me give you a challenge, Jerry.
Go ahead.
That all of us over-educated Africans have to learn how to express ourselves in our language on the issues.
Correct.
We can't keep debating issues among an educated elite. We have to make sure that everybody is included.
Thank
Over
you.
to you, Ms. Dube.
Thank you very much. Just on the issue of language, before I go to the other issue, just recently, our colleague here, he wrote an article recently on language and focusing on the issue of accountability, Gilbert. So basically he was saying that when you look at the languages in Uganda, like Luganda, what is their word for accountability? So how do we navigate? And also later on we had at the University of Pretoria a course on data protection, and my question to some of the facilitators was, how do we translate these concepts into our own languages? And I think it's something that we should work on. But also on the issue of, you are saying there are not many organizations working in this area. So the approach that I've used in my work in digital rights from the University of Pretoria is that some of the trainings that we do, we target organizations that are not traditionally in digital rights, coming from the perspective that this is a cross-cutting issue. If you are a youth organization, what does digital rights mean to you? If you are an organization focusing on children, what is the focus based on where you are coming from? There is a place for these issues. If you are looking at access to data, as you said, it's a cross-cutting issue. There is a place for it regardless of what the organization is focusing on. It could be elections, it could be social services, but there is a place for data, conversation or discourse in mainstreaming it. Thank you.
So thank you. You're advising us that we have to make sure that this Accra statement is circulated widely to all these additional civil society partners throughout the continent.
Absolutely.
Yes. Guy, you wanted to say something? And then I'll come to you, Mr. Ojo.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to say on this elections issue and data. So this alliance, African Alliance for Access to Data, is very much seized with this issue. In fact, Information Commissioner Takula challenged us, along with Commissioner Ndungu, to look at data and elections as a low-hanging fruit. So there's a lot of work taking place there, because voters, of course, want to know, is the data correct? The voter registration, the electoral data. Political parties want to know, is there data on how the other parties are performing and spending money online, including? And then you have the EMBs. They want data as to whether election management bodies, whether in fact there is disinformation there, whether there are online attacks on them. So all these stakeholders have got a lot. So anyway, right now as we
The question is, will the Accra statement help us?
Oh, absolutely, because as we speak, there's a project, and it is going to be coordinated by a Ghanaian to develop an instrument on these issues that can be used by these stakeholders around elections, why data and elections intersect.
That is really great, that already the Accra statement is gaining from tools that are going to be developed to support its recommendations. That's really interesting. One of the things in this statement that is obvious, that is not usually observed, is that if we pay for the data to be created, we should be able to access what we have paid for without paying for it again. I'll invite everybody to comment on that. But Ede, I wanted you to talk a little bit about rights in crisis. I mean, we have a lot of instability on the continent at the moment. There are communities that are facing terrible situations due to climate change, but also due to conflict. And do you see that the Accra Declaration has really addressed this tricky set of issues?
Thank you. I think that fits perfectly into the conversation we're just having about the various sectors that need to be engaged in this. My approach is we can look at this from two perspectives. There is a human rights component. So as the statement clearly says, access to data is an essential component of access to information. So it requires some regulatory framework to help protect and exercise that right. But there is also a commercial imperative that will drive people towards this once it begins to take hold. And we're looking at how do we take this forward, especially in terms of looking at the normative framework and so on and so forth. And we have zeroed in on the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which has a dual mandate, actually. It has a standard setting function, so it can provide norms and standards around a variety of human rights issues, including issues of conflict, perhaps climate change, which has become a much broader issue decades after the African Charter was adopted. But it also has an adjudicatory function. It has an interpretative function as a commission. So we believe that those two powers that the commission has gives it a lot of leverage to oversee something like this. And we're having a conversation as to the possibility of the commission providing some guidance. That is not fully resolved.
Who funds that?
God. We are hopeful that God would support the... No, but again...
Hope is not a strategy.
No, it's not a strategy, but it works for a lot of Africans, which is why we have churches and mosques all over the place. So, but seriously, we're hoping that everyone can see the value of this, because there is a place for everyone in this whole issue.
Maybe exporting your data from the continent to favor and support and power the
Do you
different
have
type
any
of,
more figures for us apart from these political statements?
No, it's not a political statement. In fact, I can in fact give you the total, trillions of dollars, that actually...
Give us the trillions of dollars
Yes.
that we're exporting.
The recent estimate is about, you were in fact giving about, 2 trillion, worth of data every year. So
2 trillion USD.
2 trillion USD, and this is going to increase in the days to come.
We are giving away 2 trillion USD of data that we could have been using to build and develop our continent. This is very interesting. And one of the things that probably Banu did not want to say, because it's very sensitive, is that they actually have a terminology. That terminology, I think you should express it.
Okay, one of the things is it's quite. I must apologize before I use that statement.
Yeah, no, it's serious.
The data centers in Africa are called slave centers, and then the data centers that exist in another part of the world are called master centers. So
Can
I
you
think
imagine?
please, I basically like everyone who deals with computer science to somehow go about changing this terminology, because that is very
extremely
unacceptable.
demeaning.
One thing that I will say, this is the last thing, we
Yes.
already have developed guidelines on openness of data, and we're looking for pilot countries. And if you think that your country is willing to work with UNESCO to pilot this open data guidelines, we are here to help you and work with you to
Banu,
take this thing forward.
we are very thankful for your intervention, and we hope you'll be a good rapporteur as well. Okay, so now let me turn back to the panel and ask each person for their closing statements. So, pardon? I'm not given that mandate because our session is the shortest. It's only 50 minutes. Amma, will you allow a question? Let her go back to the bosses. You know, when there's no boss, we go ahead. You're dying to ask it, ask it. Go ahead. Please give her a mic. But she's the only one because it's out of, yeah.
Thank you very much. This is very fascinating. I've
Please
also,
give us your name. I
name
know
is-
we all know it, but.
My name is Pensitla Kula. I'm the chairperson of the Information Regulator in South Africa, which is a data protection and access to information authority. I wear another hat now. I need to talk to you about that slave center that you are talking about, because I'm also sitting here, I'm a member of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. I would want to deal with that.
I think that, let me be non-official now and say that I think it's from ignorance. You know, they are saying these are the controlling data centers and these are the dependent data centers, satellite data centers. And they have used this terrible language that nobody is taking them up on because too few people know about it. And that's why I allowed him to make it public
Yes.
here, so that we take action and fix this quick.
So that we fix it, that is
Yes.
what I'm glad. But I have now just few comments. On data and election, Guy, as you look at that, you know that, and I'm talking on behalf of my sister here from the African Commission, don't forget we have that guideline on access to information and elections, and I hope you will then find synergies between the two when we develop your guideline. The second issue that I would like to raise is, you know, ATI laws are no longer fit for purpose. And I thought you would say that in the statement. They're not fit for purpose because, as you said, Guy, information and data is held by social media platforms. That's where it is. So to continue talking about public access to information is archaic. We need to talk about access to data and make ATI laws applicable to the private sector, as we have done in South Africa. Lastly, I looked at the statement and we commented on it. On the section dealing with disinformation and misinformation, I didn't see anything on information integrity. And you know, this is another issue that is emerging globally.
I'm
Thanks.
so happy I gave you the floor. Thank you for those excellent comments. Okay, great. So back to the panel now. I think I'll have to start with Guy because she raised a few issues for your attention. After Guy, I'll go to Jerry and then Ms. Dube, and then we'll come back to you, my senior brother. I hope you're my senior brother.
Thank you for those excellent points, Commissioner Tlakula. I want to say in closing that Commissioner Tlakula is the #1 champion of ATI and now of ATD. And she has encouraged the ANIC, African Network of Information Commissioners, to join this alliance. So thank you for your leadership. And while I'm here, I want to tell people that you don't know the story. Why is there an IDUAI? This mouthful of a name. It's because of two champions, Gilbert Senduga, please stand up, and Edith Ojo, please stand up. These guys single-handedly pounded the pavements of Paris and New York, and they got this International Day agreed at UNESCO and then at the General Assembly. That's why today, all over the world, people have International Day for universal access to information. These Africans did it. And now, so these,
And of course, Guy as well was involved.
no, but what I want to say, these champions are also now at this next frontier. They are leaders in this alliance as well. So, you know, we're going places.
All right. So who was next? Jerry?
Yes. So
That was
I'll-
powerful. Thank you, Mike. Guy.
Thanks, Dorothy. So I'll pick my closing remarks from the statement, which a bit says that increasing the volume of data does not necessarily improve the quality or its usefulness. And then I'll tie it together also that the power of data does not only, rest in the collection of data and cleaning it, but how it's being used by ordinary citizens to participate in democratic governance, to hold duty bearers to account. And mainly, the future of governance, development, and human rights depends on how we harness data responsibly and inclusively and make sure that we don't leave anyone behind. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So when I'm looking at this statement, it's an evolving issue. A lot is going to come out of this, including issues around information integrity, including issues around gender issues, extreme environmental conditions, issues around elections. So this is our starting point, but we hope that, and we are going to make sure it happens, that it evolves. It's a living document, as I'm saying. It's going to evolve into more we're going to establish more innovative ways of addressing the issues that are raised in the statement. Now it's preliminary, but it's going to explode into something much bigger. Yeah,
We hope so too. Big bro.
Thank you. So just to follow up on what Lengiwe was saying, our hope really is that there will be an opportunity for all interested stakeholders to participate in the development of a more comprehensive framework to give us some guidance on this issue. I should also mention that the Special Rapporteur has very generously agreed to work with us on this process. And if the African Commission is on board with that, then there will be a lot of consultations around the continent with different stakeholders having an opportunity to make input in the development of a framework for the continent. So I know that a few people have expressed reservations and concerns about a few aspects of the statement, but as Lengiwe said, this is just a starting point, and there will be opportunities for people to make further input.
And so who said?
Lengiwe, that's the very first name you are scared of trying. So there will be opportunity for all of us to participate in a process of elaborating a document and ensuring that it captures our knowledge and experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that if I sum up, which I cannot do in the few seconds I have left, but I think this is really a call for action, a call for engagement, that all of us should get involved in crafting this. First of all, in making sure we are disseminating it, getting it out to more people. And it has a few principles. It ends before, I think you all have your copies. They were given to you yesterday, as I have here. And it asks us to support certain commitments. That is open data initiatives that facilitate the sharing of information across sectors and communities, and perhaps we should have added borders. And then policies that prioritize transparency and accountability in data governance and ensure that data is accessible to those who need it most. Now, you could see some executive somewhere saying, but I need it more than that villager. So I think we need to tighten the language a bit. And then collaboration of stakeholders from diverse backgrounds to develop innovative solutions that leverage data for good. I can't argue with that one. And empowerment of individuals with the skills and resources to navigate and utilize data effectively. And I can't overemphasize that. So we expect to see a multiplication of initiatives that are giving funding and support to this capacity building. And Guy, I think you have been marketing one such initiative. What's the name of it?
Well, there's a course, and I gave out some leaflets called Media and Digital Policy in Africa.
Oh.
And it covers these issues of data, digital, and so on. And
you can get Get a flyer
I have
over
more
there.
copies also.
Yes.
It's a free course. It's short. There's two 4-week courses, 3 hours a
Let's
week.
use the technology. We can teach at distance very effectively now. We can interact at distance. So I'm really looking forward to more engagement, and I want to thank my excellent panelists for a very invigorating discussion with lots of things that we need to follow up on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. More applause, please, as they sit down. And shall we call it 15 minutes late so that each panel will take 15 more minutes than has been advertised? That way we'll still be in time for the rest of our programs. Launching straight into the next panel session, sharing best practices from Africa and small island developing states. The moderator is Gilbert Sendugu, Executive Director, Africa Freedom of Information Center in Uganda. Please take the stage. And if you were wondering what he looked like when he stood up, this is the opportunity. You can see him now. The speakers, in no particular order, please come to the stage as you hear your name. Chikaiko Chanduda, CEO, Central Medical Trust. Please take your seats. I'll hold on with the rest. This is a breakaway session. We have another session simultaneously at the Prince Hall. And so I'll announce what it is and give you the opportunity to decide which one you're joining. The second session is Access to Information in the Small Island Developing States, Challenges and Opportunities. That will be moderated by Toby Mendel, who is the chair of Freedom of Information Advocates Network from Canada. If you're here, Toby? Okay, he is. Toby is standing up and heading towards the Prince Hall. Please feel free to follow for that session. It works if each session has a good audience. So what I'm asking you nicely is half of you, please go for that session and the other half stay. Particularly if you have interest in access to information in small island developing states. And so I continue to tell you who else will be on this panel here at the Rage Arena. Innocent Primos Mungi, the head of public relations and communications at the Ministry of Information, Communication and Information Technology in the United Republic of Tanzania. Say, Dennis Obo, Principal Information Scientist, Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development in Uganda. And Denise Mwafuliwa, Program Officer, Center for Human Rights Rehabilitation in Malawi. The rapporteur will be Masiko Ito, who will be doing her work from afar. Please, can I ask you to give a very resounding, especially because we are all moving around. Moving to join the panel at Prince Hall, we have Stella Dubiria, the Director of Human Rights, Department of Justice and Border Control in Nauru. Mina Akush, who is an information analyst in Seychelles. Gitajali Gutierrez, who is an information commissioner in Bermuda. She'll be joining by video. And then we have Rajieli Tuivaga, who is the Director of the Fiji Law Reform Commission. The rapporteur will be Marius Lukasinos, who is with UNESCO. If you are staying for this session, I think you should come forward a little bit. Let's still get more people closer so that I can hand over to the moderator now. Thank you very much for obliging me. Right, Gilbert, your audience.
Thank you very much. Hello, good morning. Welcome to the most exciting panel that is going to be discussing best practices on the implementation of the right to information in Africa. As you've heard, my name is Gilbert Sendugwa, and I'm joined by eminent panel of these distinguished gentlemen from across Africa, and our rapporteur is going to be Misako Ito, Regional Advisor, Information and Communication, UNESCO. Now, the 2015 United Nations World Survey, my world survey involving 1.5 million people, found that 1.5 million people from 194 countries found that 4 main issues were of great interest to citizens of the world in that survey, in this order: education services, healthcare, job opportunities, and honest and inclusive and responsive government. None of these can exist without an effective access to information and public participation. In yesterday's opening session, we learned rightfully that access to information laws are only important when they are effectively implemented. And yet, as we know, there are struggles in implementing these access to information legislations across Africa. You find constituencies of women, youth, persons with disabilities, and in fact everyone being challenged in accessing and exercising their right to information. So this panel has 3 public officials who are going to be sharing their experiences and good practices on how they have been promoting the right to information and enabling people to enjoy this right. We also have a distinguished activist who has been promoting the demand side of the right to information, pushing some of the public agencies in Malawi so that people can get information, so they're able to effectively participate in their governance, so that the 4 issues that they care about, education, health services, job opportunities, honest and responsive governments, can be realized. Now, let me start with you, Dr. Chikaiko, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Central Medical Stores of Malawi. Please share your experiences on how you have been promoting the right to information in your agency, and what has been the experiences. Dr. Chikaiko.
Thank you so much. Initially, I should thank UNESCO for providing this opportunity that I could come before this audience and present my experiences. Indeed, it has been quite interesting. As the CEO of a medical trust, the structure we have in Malawi is that we as a medical stores trust, we are autonomous. For those who are familiar with the provision of health services, we use a pool system whereby hospitals would present orders to us, then we supply the medicines. And we're involved in a huge procurement relatively to the size of the country. We have a substantial percentage of the budget for provisions of medicines. And we provide free medicines in Malawi, that's 100%. So it is a very sensitive area, operationally as well as politically. It's an area where you would have politicians, they use it a lot for campaigning. So it becomes very sensitive because in most cases, you would find each category of people would like to use Central Medical Stores Trust as really a campaign tool. Now, when I was joining Central Medical Stores in 2021,